Love it or hate it, the Darksiders games have somehow cultivated an enraptured audience of diehard fans that seem to just go with, well, whatever it takes to get the titles. It's refreshing to see that with a series, especially a series like this, where its lore is a hilarious Machiavellian portfolio of shenanigans going down in the underworld that make a TV show like Supernatural look like baby's first kit for understanding demon politics. And now add to that the massive change to a full Diablo-style title, though I think we all can admit Darksiders 1, 2, and 3 all stuck with the same overall premise, but they did switch it up from the overt over-the-top action of Darksiders 1 to the strangely almost Zelda-like puzzle and world structure of the second title and the hack-and-slash action of the third that borrowed from all the other games prior and never really settled into its own track to begin with. But there really is just something about the Darksiders universe, fighting the good fight as bad guys, fighting the bad fight against the worst guys, which is somehow making you good guys. It doesn't make sense, but if history has shown us anything, as long as there's good gameplay, it doesn't really need to. Darksiders will be out this week for Stadia and PC, and for the Switch, Xbox, and PS4 in February. It's a prequel to the prior titles telling the story of Strife and Brother War in their battle against Old Scratch himself. Time to check it out. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe, check that notification bell so you get all the updates. Or maybe go out and find a YouTuber that you like that you haven't subscribed to and subscribe to them. Graphics are up first. I dig it. I actually really dig it. Now, this is not Masterworks all. The game's not going to win awards for being the most technically apt, but man, they nail it. Other than one thing, which I'll actually get to in a second. Because I have to say, I was not sure about the title. Diablo style, it could feel like many of the other games that are out there, but where Genesis excels is the wonder of that blocky look, harkening back to almost World of Warcraft armor and enemy designs and styles in its art, and it looks amazing. Hidden locations are replete throughout the levels, and whether you're shanking some demon who's decided the absolute best place to attack you is from the inside of another demon, or you're wisping through the bottom levels of some dank cave up to your armored ankles in what's probably a bunch of demon shit. From its excellent lighting engine to its monolithic locations, Genesis really does nail the feel of Darksiders. The first area itself starts with you riding your steed across the edges of this barren mountain, and you're watching a battle beside you, and it just goes from there. Animation goes from good to excellent, and the game's bevy of particle use, pretty much always at the end of Strife's massive hand cannons or war sword, it all does a great job translating what was once a third-person and behind-the-shoulder view to a three-fourths one. That is, aside from the distance. But as 40 bad guys and 2 somewhat good guys go head-to-head with enough magically enchanted weapons to film 4 Lord of the Rings simultaneously, the issue becomes noticeable, and it's hard to see sometimes. A bit of camera work would have done wonders here. This also crops up at times when you're behind scenery, and while the game does outline you with a blue outline to see where you are, you can't see enemies, or locations, or items. This can make a couple jumping puzzles a bit harder than they should be, and I would have loved to have seen a faded transparency system on the game world to stop the inevitable moment when you fall off a cliff you didn't know was there that's behind a pillar you weren't sure was in your way. Also, while I love the game's levels, for instance, each offers these momentary awesome moments, these sprawling bits across frozen fields or frigid lakes that are fed by long-cooled rivers, or these quick sprints as lava traps flow down spillways, the inevitable does happen. The game's love for jumping puzzles and my love for them can be a bit punishing due to that view again. There are a lot of times where lining up a jump, even with a button solely used to jump away from whatever you're climbing, doesn't exactly pay off the way you thought. If the level gained power for killing me as much as I gain power for killing bad guys, the damn thing would have a special move available all the time. That being said, I was able to look past it, or at the very least continue on, even though it was always there nagging just a little bit. But even as it began to bother me, I just kept looking back and thinking, this thing is doing a really good job translating the feel between these two new worldviews. But none of that would matter if we're getting like 5 frames per second, would it? Luckily, the game's performance is really well done, and while it doesn't have a huge number of graphical options, when you look in there, it's actually pretty bare. It does get well over 120 FPS on a 2080 Ti at maxed out settings on 4K on most of the levels, offering a damned good-looking game. I did have a stutter or two when cutscenes loaded, but that sorted itself out fairly quickly. That's more attached to the streaming moments than it is to the actual requirements of any battle on screen that you see. I was not sure what to expect with this game, but I think Darksiders Genesis looks incredible even with that odd camera bit, and the game has these awesome moments, and that animation of yanking a creature out of the air and Flintstone bam him into the ground to kill it, or leaping into the air yourself and karate kicking a skeleton in the face is hard to hate, and all of it comes together even when you have a ton of enemies on the screen. And that brings us to sound, music, and voice.
treading lightly.
Is that your best? Hell is a pit of vipers. Do demon lords need a reason to wage war with one another?
Guess not, but someone got bold.
They will provide entertainment on our way to Samael.
You better have something interesting to tell us, or the council is going to be pissed.
If we don't keep moving, we'll be questioning a corpse.
Hurrying for his sake? How annoying.
And we're going to do sound first. And this is excellent. The first thing I notice is that even at the zoomed out distance, little attention to detail moments started to crop up, like War's trooping around a frozen winter wasteland like a homicidal Santa in a Campbell's soup can outfit, and you can actually hear the clanking of the armor bits just barely above inaudible levels, allowing for you to sort of feel his movement, or the informative, silky sound of all the souls being collected as you spin around enemies. It's also the weapon sounds, though, whether it's Strife in the air laying down a suppressive fire with his cannons or charging up a huge special attack, or even occasionally wading in with his own up-close attacks, trying his hardest to make War notice that he isn't just all range combat. The use of mixing works incredibly well here to give you a sense of distance. There's also an attention to detail for the care of the listener. For example, Strife's continued gun sounds are just slightly varied and not really incredibly loud. Those are two things that are needed for any weapon that's going to be fired all the time, like his will be. But then when he leaps in and performs a finisher move and the gun switches to this almost mystical shotgun blast that reverberates around and informs the gamer, even in the thick of battle, what's going on, it really works. War is the same, and while many of his attacks are a bit more of the weapon-to-weapon variety, some care has been done to make sure that you don't get ear numb. Now, you probably will, as games like this sort of inevitably lead to that, but regardless of that, it is great work and it's noticeable. Also, enemies have all manner of attack sounds matched with animations, and special sounds with special animations, which at the very least can be used to queue up a dodge, even if you're not 100% sure which of the dozen or so enemies on screen is the one attacking you. Also, environmentally, the game works well with processing on almost everything to highlight sweeping vistas with snow blowing around your horsemen to tighter corridors, and those are all reflected in the weapon samples. If there was one thing I didn't like about the sound, there were a couple times where a sound for a particular weapon didn't seem to be playing, in particular, War's giant ninja star. And that brings us to music. It's rare I find myself listening to this much music in a game like this. Let's be realistic. The idea many times of even hearing the music in a game like this is difficult, since battle sounds like you took an entire Renaissance fair and threw them down the nearby cliffside and then just recorded it. However, I urge you to adjust the mixing just a bit in the game options, because the music is phenomenal, from barely audible violins that trill away in the background offsetting these lonely walks across frozen bridges that always seem to be abandoned, to some soul-stirring battle music that starts up. Seriously, the battle music is really enjoyable. It's dynamic overall, but one track starts out with a single violin that's just sort of keening away, informing you shit's about to hit the mystical fan. Then it picks up and matches your battle flow and steps up its intensity perfectly. Also, kudos to them for knowing that battle actually doesn't always have to have intense instruments all fighting for the front row of the orchestra. Sometimes it'll step back. Occasionally, there'll be nothing there, just you and the crash of steel or the report of the guns. And that means the next time it crops up, it's going to be instantly recognizable. Darksiders is not entirely unique in the way its atmosphere looks, but the excellent music and the way in which it tracks with you and the moments where it's smart enough to not really pop up and get in your face work to offer a really unique audio experience that I will remember for a long time, and I will absolutely listen to this music even outside of the game. And that brings us to voice. Yeah, this is much more hit and miss for me. So the growl of war and the hilarious slimy vocal cavalcade of all the demons themselves are pretty much fine, but Strife is really an acquired taste in this game for me. It has nothing to do with the vocal actors, but more to do with the presentation and the writing. The first time you hear Strife try to tell a knock-knock joke, it starts to feel like you're playing with his little brother, Frustration. It would be the same thing if War started discussing his time volunteering at the local animal shelter. I get it, it needs that tit for tat, it needs that balance between the consistently constipated War, who sounds like he has the biggest human bone and misery shit on deck imaginable, and Strife, who is, for all intents and purposes, really comedic sidekick in his overtones. It was not bad, but it never really fully worked for me. Your mileage is going to vary. And that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. So as a prequel to the other games, you play as War and Strife, fresh off the killing of a bunch of their brethren who find out through the consistently not trustworthy council and groups around that Lucifer is trying to screw everything up again. You take the controls of War or Strife, or both characters, in a top-down action game, slashing through the enemies as you try to fight your way to Lucifer and see what rhymes that Dark Prince's spin into the other demons to get them to all work with him. The game is set across a series of levels, with you usually taking out enemies and trying to open the next gate or gain entry to the next location to further that story. Between the levels, you're shuttled back to your sanctuary to buy new moves, new items, further the story by talking to characters who are either defeated or meet you in the game, and basically take a moment of respite before kicking the shit out of a monster-laden menagerie with your amazing horseman skills. Now, first, we're just all going to ignore the fact that, seriously, nobody would want to face these guys. It's like standing up to the dude in prison nicknamed Human Eater. You just don't do it, but they do. So you end up having to take them out with your basic attacks, which are War's sword and Strife's guns, with a light and heavy attack for War and a normal shot, and then some specialty ammo for Strife. As you kill enemies, you gather souls, which is basically your currency, and power that is used to power up your major attacks. Now, Strife can draw up a shadow clone of himself, for instance, to take out enemies and fire at guys as maybe you run off to get a little peace and quiet to heal yourself, while War does exactly what War does best and launches a ton of blades into the ground, and some other skills as well. Additionally, back at base, you can buy add-ons for those attacks, like more combos, more moves, gaining power for special attacks more quickly, and so forth. You also gather a number of items along the way for puzzling, including a massive fiery gauntlet which can bust through marked parts of the world to open up new locations and treasures, or things like a bomb that activates teleporters across the game world, which allows for you to move yourself or items through them, and of course do those puzzles. The mix of the weapons themselves being used for the puzzles is not new in Darksiders or perhaps many other games, but it works tremendously well here, most likely due to the fact that they are all very powerful in and of themselves, except really for that bomb in particular. They feel less like one-offs and more like items you truly would use in battle. When it comes to leveling up War and Strife, you not only have Hellstones and Wrathstones and armor pieces. Collecting bits of them allows you to combine them, and they raise those different meters. It's also a way to unlock skins, but many are hidden throughout the levels, so expect to be smashing walls, slashing through barrels, and doing as much damage as you can to the game world to find a lot of these. As you progress through the game, you get various different abilities, including Wraith abilities, which you unlock. There's 3 of those, plus a Synergy ability in there. You also get characters' gear and special items. The big call to arms here in Darksiders, and something that they have discussed from the very start, though, are the creature cores. Now, creature cores are gathered as you, well, kill creatures. That's how the name got there. You can get those creature cores either from minor enemies, like basic bitch enemies you flail away on in the majority of the game, or major ones that you get from boss enemies. These fit into a statistic slot on your creature core table, and each slot has a particular trait it's attuned to, like attack, wrath, or health. Putting a core in a slot, as long as there is another next to it, notches you up a few rungs in power, but matching the core type with the slot gets you the full boost. And I adore the system. It's like trying to go home with a flat and throwing just any old tire on the car. It's going to get you there, but it ain't going to look pretty, and it's probably not very good for the car. The same thing happens here. Since you need to put something in each slot, as that powers the next slot next to it, sometimes you're just going to throw whatever you can in there, taking a small bonus, because you don't have the proper attack core that you need. It's a nice way to keep you watching your loot drops, because it'll send you diving back into that creature core board if you do end up getting that core, so you can switch them out. It's not an overly complex system, but it works very well to, as I said, keep your attention as well as drive a bit of that exploration. Also, the major cores from most of the bosses have some pretty insane unique skills as well that get tacked on for War and Strife, changing the way you play a little bit. For example, one core adds an additional skill to the caltrops that slows enemies. And that does sound like a minuscule thing versus just blowing them up, but in a game like this, it helps tremendously on the harder difficulties, or if you're in the arena mode, or if you're just going it alone, as they can make crowd control possible when normally it really isn't. When it comes to the monsters, the game's got an assortment of enemies from low-level fodder to mid-level to harder badasses who add an additional level of strategy to any fight they're in, to the main bosses themselves. Their mixture and makeup means that one battle's a slugfest with you up close, blocking attacks and slamming home a couple hard hits to take out an enemy with a shield, for instance, to far more strategic battles that stretch across a screen or two as you're doing your damnedest to make sure that a fiery dog doesn't try to leap on you and hump your leg to a fiery, blistering end. It's not all battle, though. As I said, platforming and puzzling are here in droves, and while none of the puzzles are hard, per se, they're mixed with the battles, and their threaded presentation into the platforming works really well. What doesn't work so well, there's a couple things. The first is control, and I spoke a bit about this in the graphics section. One in particular thing I just hated, which is War's Vorpal Blade, which is basically like a cool ninja star from Kroll. If you know what that movie is, you're old or you love B-movies. Anyway, on a controller, it's holding down a thumbstick while having to swirl around and find hotspots to send the blade off to, especially for puzzles. That's a good control scheme, especially if you hate kids and fun and clowns and parties and gravity and good controls. Otherwise, it actually just plain sucks, and not normal sucks, the kind that's on dark web videos. In groups, while Straith has both up-close and ranged weapons, though his up-close is no great shakes, War, due to this, feels a bit hampered with insanely hard-hitting up-close stuff, and then this strange ranged weapon that feels like it has all the accuracy of just someone yelling and pointing over there. Another thing I didn't love is that the map doesn't update your location, or doesn't really seem to, requiring a lot more guessing as to where you are than actual knowledge of where you are. This is probably to augment the sense of exploration and mystery. It augmented my sense of fuck you and not turning the map on. Lastly, and this isn't a negative, it's just some information, Darksiders isn't like Diablo, where it's made to consistently grind loot. You're not grinding items, though you can grind the creature cores themselves, but it probably doesn't hold the same reward loop if you're expecting a sword +2 and a sword +3 with fiery damage. I'm not saying you won't want to play it a couple times, I just don't think it's that exact same style. While Darksiders Genesis could take you more than 15 hours, the number of hidden items and upgrades and special bits could easily take you more. It also has a demonic arena where you can go in and take ever more difficult enemy waves for various rewards, and some of those, even on normal difficulty, get really damn insane, and there's a bunch of them. And that brings me to fun factor. Yes, I know, some things were not great in the game. I also had a pretty wicked bug that almost stopped progress in Chapter 7. Luckily, I worked through it, and the devs are patching this stuff. It didn't stop progress, but it appeared to. Lastly, I love the fact that you can do couch co-op with this on your computer or with others online. You know what? None of the issues affected me. Even playing mostly alone, only getting to jump in with others twice, the top-down isometric view of Strife and War just John Morrising their way across the Underhells, weapons firmly in hand, and engage in the highest stakes money in the bank match you could ever think of, never got less than fun. I've been a big fan of some of these kinds of titles, but I'm not the kind of guy who goes into Diablo and can name your drop loot chances or knows the moment new DLC will drop. For Genesis, I might be that guy. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC titles if that's the score I give it. I think Darksiders Genesis is an absolute blast and well worth getting right now. Half of the time I was playing this game, I was really enjoying that ludicrous story. It's just all over the place. That's typical Darksiders. It certainly isn't as long or in-depth as the normal Darksiders game, but it got me through it, and I was interested in the prequel story. One of the things, though, that Genesis does is it's just strife and war, brothers to the bone, fighting against everyone's favorite bad guy, Lucifer. That is hard to deny. It also handles it insanely well, and once again, it does move into a completely different viewpoint and does it stupendously well. It really is rare that we get titles like this that adjust almost their entire genre into something else, but with Darksiders Genesis, it worked. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Check out Reddit and Twitter and Facebook, all that. It's in the description. And of course, you can become a patron on the Patreon website, where we have the coolest Discord in the world. We have great games that we discuss. You can have a chance of jumping on the Patreon podcast with me. Of course, check out here or Twitch, ACG on Twitch, for any further stuff. And I hope to see you in 2020 doing some more reviews. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.